Welcome to the Rabbi and the Shrink. Welcome, Rabbi. How are you today?
I am wonderful, Doctor. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
I can attest to that. You are wonderful. That is for sure. Today is number 8. We've done 8 broadcasts or podcasts, whatever the young people call them these days. And our topic is, drumroll, gossip. Now, we've talked about gossip. Have I got a story for you? So, Rabbi, what is your take on gossip?
Oh boy, we could go all day and all night on this one.
We could, and then you would owe me a beer.
I'll be happy to treat you to a beer anytime.
A virtual beer. Whoop,
that's right. It's a when we talk about ethics, one of the things I write in my recent book, Grappling with the Gray, is that the last refuge of the unethical is saying, well, it's not illegal.
That's a great way. Is that your saying?
And yes. And the last refuge of the gossiper is saying, well, it's true. And that's exactly the point. If it weren't true, it wouldn't be gossip, it would be slander. But in Jewish tradition, there are, I believe it's 36 different prohibitions that all relate to one's speech.
Good.
So it's possible to violate 36 prohibitions in the Old Testament by speaking ill of another person. And when you consider that in society today, we have such things as gossip columns, institutionalized gossip. They're using the Bible describes a person who get with a condition. It's in the Hebrew word is tsaras. It's often mistranslated as leprosy because it resembles leprosy. It's the condition of the skin that is a spiritual affliction, and the primary cause for it is malicious gossip. Because the whole point of speech is to connect, to communicate, to form relationships, to achieve a meeting of minds. And what does gossip do? It does exactly the opposite. It divides us from one another. It cuts us off. And so when a person develops this skin condition that identifies the person as a gossiper, they have to go outside the camp, outside the community for a week. And if it disappears, they can go through a ritual purification process, allows them to come back in. But the lesson is, if you're going to act in a way that divides people, you are essentially forfeiting the privilege of living as a member of society. And so conscientiousness with speech, and when the person would come back from having this condition, they would have to bring an offering in the temple, and the offering was a bird. And so the commentaries ask, why a bird? Because what does a bird do? It goes tweet, 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 tweet. Always chirping its information. So now what do we have? We have Twitter. You can tweet your gossip to millions of people at one time. Why? Just to get attention, just to tear the people down, just to make yourself look good in comparison.
And that's the sad part. It doesn't make you look good at all. It makes you look bad.
No, and speech should be sanctified. It should elevate us and it should bring us together.
Isn't that the truth? Wow. Well, I like your idea. The last refuge of the gossip is say it's true. And my friend who's Orthodox would say, even if you're sharing good news, it's still gossip. The gossip doesn't have to tear people down. It's speaking of others, especially if it's yucky stuff. I mean, we're saying about someone's failures or their mistakes or, something about their heritage or anything like that. I mean, I think that, Pope Francis, I'm Roman Catholic, so Pope Francis would say, and I'll quote him, I'll read it. It's gossip. It's so rotten, gossip. At the beginning, it seems to be something enjoyable and fun, like a piece of candy. But at the end, it fills the heart with bitterness and also poisons us. And he was talking about, from his point of view, part of the poison is that we're not acknowledging that God loves us all. So if I'm speaking ill of somebody, I'm not giving God enough credit that this person, whoever they may be, is still loved by God. I mean, and I'm paraphrasing to make a long, complicated story more simple. Why by you is gossip so wrong?
Well, we already mentioned that it tears the community apart.
But how? Why is it so divisive, though?
Well,
It's just a word.
Well, we like to teach our kids, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. And it's important to teach kids to be resilient, and others can only hurt us to the degree which we let them, in terms of hurting our feelings and such. But if someone tears down my reputation, I mean, people can lose jobs. People can have relationships destroyed. We actually break it down into different types of gossip. There's a certain form called tale bearing, which is, do you know what that person said about you? That's not just maligning someone's character. That's actively intervening to damage the relationship between two people. And the model of good speech that we have in our tradition is Aaron, the high priest, the brother of Moses, that when he would hear that two friends had gotten in a fight and weren't talking to each other, he would go to one and say, your friend is so upset. He misses you so much. He really wants to make up and get back together. And then you go to the first one and say, your friend is so upset. He really misses you. He wants to get. So people ask, well, is that deceitful? And probably not, because if people were friends and they have a falling out, they probably are upset. And it probably was through something that was relatively trivial or easily repaired, or even it's not easy, which still doesn't outweigh all the history of that relationship. We can use our speech to accomplish so much.
And first, we have to be thoughtful, though. As you said, most people are not so thoughtful with their words when they've got some bee in their bonnet, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned that even good speech can be gossip. Actually, sometimes you have to be careful, because sometimes you can actually use that to incite gossip. There's, if I know that we have a mutual acquaintance and you don't like her, and so I'll say something nice about her in your presence. And what does that do? That gets you riled up. So you say, oh, she's not really a good, but she didn't do that for the right reason. I'll put a stumbling block before you, so that you'll now be drawn in to that gossip. So I'm a troublemaker, right? I want to.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not just gossip. That's gossip supersized, because it's passive aggressive and aggressive, depending on how far it goes. It's getting in the middle of people. It's malicious. It's aggressive. Well, I would call it emo terrorism. A terrorist leaves a bomb and escapes, and they don't get hurt, but there's disaster in their wake. There are people around there. I call them the pink fluffy biting bunnies. I wrote a book called Color Me Difficult, and I created 6 different characters that are dysfunctional communicators. It's not personality, because anyone can be. And to me, the pink fluffy biting bunny is the most malicious. You can see they have big vampire teeth and a vampire shirt, and they have peace signs, but it's backwards. Everyone thinks they might be sweet and innocent and all pink, but really their chief word is saboteur, which I think gossip is a saboteur effort. And I think that gossip by itself becomes this entity that I think destroys the soul and the heart, reputations, moods, everything. I mean, it's awful.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because in fact, in Hebrew, it's pointed out that the Hebrew word for tale-bearing is phonetically related to the word for spy or saboteur.
There you go.
So you certainly have a good foundation for that observation.
We do. Hey, where do we get this list of the 36 prohibitions? How do I research that?
I would actually have to look that up. I don't. There's actually, and I plan to talk about him. There was a rabbi who was the leader of much of European Jewry in the 1800s and early 1900s, named Rabbi Israel Meir Kagan, and he wrote a book called Guard Your Tongue. Yes, that's the loose English translation of the Hebrew. And he was and is the primary advocate for refined speech and for cautiousness. We have endless tales about him. He was sitting with another rabbi in an inn. Jewish stories almost always take place in inns. We're all transients. We're moving through the world, and so we have these stopping points along the way. But he was eating with his friend, and the proprietor was very excited to have this prestigious rabbi in his establishment, and he kept coming over and checking, how is everything? How's the food? After the main course, he came again. How was the dinner? And Rabbi Israel Meir said, wonderful, wonderful. And his friend said, yes, it was very good. It just could have used a little bit more salt in the entree. And as soon as he left, Rabbi Israel Meir became furious and said, how dare you speak malicious gossip in my presence? And he said, I just suggested there could be a little salt. He says, don't you realize what could happen? There's a cook in the back, and this proprietor, he wants to make a good impression because he has me here and he wants to impress me. And now he feels that he's been, it looks bad on him, and he's going to go back and he's going to yell at the cook. And maybe she's a widow, maybe she needs the job, and he's going to threaten to fire her. And his friend said, Rabbi, you're letting your imagination get carried away with you. You're so getting carried away. It's how. What's the likelihood that would actually be the case? Well, let's go see. And they go in the back of the kitchen, and there's this blowout fight between the proprietor and the cook. He says, look what you caused. If there's a reason, in other words, if you're in a cooking school and you want to know how the food is because you're going to go make your livelihood this way, yes, there's a reason to critique the food. But if I'm a patron in a restaurant and the food's fine, maybe just it's not exactly to my taste, why do I need to express an opinion that isn't going to help, that isn't going to benefit anybody? There's no real benefit to it. Then why am I saying it?
And that brings me to a discussion I had once. I used to travel a lot before, as Cubans say, the COVID. And we were all stuck at an airport in Maine. And there was a bar, and we were drinking coffee, and we were going to be there. It turns out we were there for 2 nights. I mean, two days and 2 nights. It was, we all got to know each other. And we were talking about what is the difference between complaining, gossip, and just having an opinion or requesting something. And it was there were people from all over the world and people from different walks of life. And it was very fun listening to people's sense of entitlement that they should be able to criticize everything if it wasn't to their liking, as if it was a God-given right or even useful. So that was interesting,
the sages teach, eat bread with salt, drink water in measure, and sleep on the floor. And they're not telling us that we have to do that. What they're telling us is, if you have the minimum, you're okay. Be able to get by with the minimum. And then if you have more, you will appreciate it as a gift, and you won't see it as something you're entitled to. And if you lose that, but you still have the minimum, you'll still be able to function. You're still going to be able to get by. I mean, you think about the things that we complain about. I mean, I mentioned this before, Zoom fatigue. I get it. You spend a whole day in front of the computer. It can get a little bit much. But imagine if we didn't have Zoom during this crisis, how cut off and isolated we would be. I mean, what a blessing to have this. Okay, it glitches occasionally. It fades in and out occasionally. I'm not very tech savvy, so I'm always trying to figure out the controls. But I'm so grateful that we have this. Focus on, it's a cliche, but cliches are true. Focus on the positive. Look at what's good. Be grateful. And the Hebrew word for gratitude is Hakar Satov, which means recognizing the good. If we recognize the good in our lives, we'll find a lot less reason to complain. We may not even notice the things that aren't perfect because we're occupying our attention with the things that we have to be grateful for.
You know, there's several studies in the medical and wellness communities that if you wake up every morning and think of 1, 2, or 3 things for which you're grateful, even if in the moment you're so depressed, all you can think about is your left pinky doesn't hurt. Finding things to be grateful for is one of the secrets to not only happiness, but good relationships with ourselves, God, and the world, right? And I think there's always something to be grateful for. What I'm always surprised at is people have such hissy fits when things don't go their way. I missed the memo. Were things supposed to go my way? I don't know if I got that memo. And I think that, so Malcolm's on the line. Malcolm, we made it so that you could join. We decided to make it a meeting to show faces if you want to show your face. But either way, you can also open your mic and speak with us as well. So one of the things that I'm thinking about is the sense of entitlement. And on the flip side of the sense of entitlement are those people who feel they just have to grin and bear it and not say anything. And in between, I think, is where ethics lives. How do you say what you need to say in a way that opens hearts, minds, and conversations, right? And I think learning how to speak like Kagan, right? Guarding your tongue, speaking civilly, with respect, without too many cuss words.
It's Rabbi Kagan.
It's Rabbi Kagan. Oh, even better. So he's a rabbi, or Rabbi Kagan. I just changed my note on that. And I think that that's one of the things to look at. When I first came to this country, as a refugee, we left everything behind. And almost right away, we went to school. And in Sunday school, my favorite nun was Sister Paul Joseph. And now she changed her name back many years ago to their real name, Sister Rita Baum, and Baum. A brilliant woman, a real philosopher, one of the kindest souls I've ever met. And she helped me understand why people were being so mean. And so let's talk about it. Why are people so easy to tear others down? And then I'll tell you what Sister Rita Baum had to say about it. Rabbi?
I think we touched on this already.
We did.
That there's so much emphasis on self-esteem, which maybe we could do a whole show on self-esteem.
All right, let me add it to the list.
But we all want to feel good about ourselves. And the problem with self-esteem, the way it's taught or presented today, is it's often disconnected from any basis for that self-esteem. If I'm going to feel good about myself, it needs to be because I feel there's reason to feel good about myself. And if I haven't done anything, or I'm not doing anything, or I'm not acting in a way that is worthy of self-esteem, then I feel like a fraud. I don't really feel that I have true value. And I then have 2 choices. Either I can now go do something valuable, I can conduct myself in a way that elevates me, or I can tear other people down. And it's a lot easier to destroy than it is to build. So if I find fault with people, if I find fault with things, if I make the world out to be a miserable place, then either I look better in comparison, or I'm justified in my feelings of blah, my feelings of inadequacy, my feelings that I'm somehow substandard, because the whole world is substandard, or these other people are substandard. And rather than looking at myself and taking responsibility, what do I need to do to make myself a person of greater quality? I'd rather just cast aspersions on everyone and everything around me.
And that is just very sad. And my father would have said, if you feel unworthy, maybe you are. And if you feel guilty, so I would say I feel guilty about something. He said, well, let's stop here. Are you guilty? So if you're guilty, what do you need to do about it? Fix it. And then we had long discussions about, how to fix things without hurting people more, and what to say to who, when, where, and how. The why we were already discussing. I think the whole idea of people tearing other people down. Movies are rife with a cute girl who is mean, who tears everyone down, and more recent history with movies. I think that the scriptwriters have gotten it right. They later on reveal, whether it's Maleficent or some beautiful blonde girl in a high school prom thing, that it's because her parents aren't, she had some, the high school girl, because her parents never pay attention, they weren't nice, and so she's bitter and angry and jealous. Or like with Maleficent, that she was betrayed by her young love. And that's not enough of excuse to become a raging Maleficent queen. But it's still, I think today we're giving more backstory that we're not just born good or bad. We have choices every step of the way. And some of the most interesting people I know have made terrible choices and paid for them one way or another. And they come back smarter, wiser, and kinder.
It's very interesting you mentioned these movies. I know the Joker was another one.
Yeah.
Where they, all the terrible things that were done to this person to turn him into a monster. And I have mixed feelings about them. Because on the one hand, as you say, and as Jewish tradition teaches, always look for a way to judge the whole person. And until you know the background, the backstory, which we usually don't, then I'm not in a position to completely judge that person. I can judge the behavior, but I can't necessarily judge the person. But I think one of the side effects of these types of movies is it communicates on some level that people really aren't responsible for themselves. And
I think there's a flavor of that.
That's dangerous.
There's a flavor of that, because I think if I have enough things in the checkbox that say that I'm justified, then I'm off the hook. I don't ever believe we're off the hook.
No, never.
I do think, and if we move from the of judging others to the of understanding, I think empathy and compassion are the secret to managing the most difficult of people, conversations, and circumstances. That's the key. So if we have empathy for others, then we can ask ourselves, why? What do they get out of it? But the more important question is, what do they need?
Yeah.
And if I know what someone needs, maybe I can find a way to address it without humiliating them and inviting them to rethink things. I don't have the power to change people, but I have the power to invite and facilitate.
And that's the difference between kindness and compassion. Kindness is giving. Compassion is responding to a need. And in order to be compassionate, to respond to the needs of others, we have to have empathy. And I think we've mentioned before that empathy is the E in ethics. That the first step towards being ethical is being able to sense where people are, what they need, what their situation is, to be responsive to those needs and responsive to situations. And if we can cultivate that in ourselves, then we are definitely on a path towards living more ethical lives, more compassionate lives. We're going to feel better about ourselves because we're going to feel the sense that we are making a positive contribution to the world we live in.
Especially if we're showing that compassion toward ourselves as well. Since no one escapes the mistake thing, or being ungracious. I mean, we all take turns with being amazing and awful, right? When I deal with big groups of people, I have them say, I'm wonderful. And they say, I'm wonderful or awesome. And then I say, and now I'm awful. Now I would say, get over it. Because we're both. I mean, we're all amazing and we're also awful. And I think that the point is recognizing that. And I think when we recognize that, there's less of a need to gossip.
Yeah, because
we're all in the same boat.
Wouldn't you rather be talking about things that are uplifting?
But that would mean I'd have to think, Rabbi. You give me too much.
Yes.
Why would I want to think when I could just react negatively to everything? I mean, the easiest thing in the world is to just say no. And and be mean to people. That's so easy. It doesn't take any thought.
And that kind of leads into the whole discussion about the habits that we form. You know, the Jewish ethicists or moralists, they say that one shouldn't speak ill even of inanimate objects. So I'm walking along and I trip over a chair, a stupid chair. Well, first of all, the chair is not stupid. It could be the person who left the chair where they shouldn't have, which might have been me.
Or me.
But what that does is I'm not going to hurt the chair's feelings. We're not worried about the chair. What are we worried about? We're worried about developing a habit of being critical, of blaming other things, other people, situations, not taking responsibility for ourselves. We simply then get ourselves in that way of thinking where the moment anything happens that is not in line with what we want or what we expect, we immediately lash out in some way. And if we do it with inanimate objects, it's not going to be long before we're doing it with people.
I think the advantage of being negative, though, is that it can prevent me from looking at my own feelings and my own accountability. If I'm too busy with the poison of gossip or blame and criticism, I certainly then can avoid the heart-wrenching job of looking at myself and thinking, what did I do well? What could I do better? What was awful? How do I fix it? Why did I do that? Did I hurt their feelings? I mean, the kind of self-reflection that is not tortured, but just respectful. I think tortured introspection is not useful. I think it's a way of avoiding responsibility for the joy and love. You know?
Yeah, that's really insightful, because really what we tend to do, we tend to set higher standards for others than we do for ourselves, when it should be the other way around. We should be setting higher standards for ourselves and being more inclined to give other people a pass when we can. But as you say, if we set standards for ourselves that are too high, that we can't meet our own standards, then we're setting ourselves up for depression, a sense of failure, a sense of inadequacy. And so, like anything else in the ethical universe, there's no app for any of this.
Yet.
Well, and let's hope there isn't, frankly, because it's that internal struggle. It's that tension. It's that continuous effort that we make to stretch ourselves as much as we can without stretching ourselves so much that we snap. That's really what an ethical life is.
And I think that one of the things that's hard for the people who are harsh with themselves is that it really is a strategy to avoid growth and accountability. Being too hard forms an excuse from change. So I can't do it.
Right.
I think at the core of so many of our negative thoughts is fear that we're not good enough or that we're not lovable. We talked before about the things that make our brain light up with all sorts of wonderful endorphins and stuff like that, and hearing our name and the idea that we're loved or lovable. Forget the text. I know that's there, but that just seems so. But even a text is that I love you, I need you, I miss you. But the truth is it isn't. Because now, whether you're friending everyone or sending texts, a lot of them don't mean that you're loved. It means someone's bored or addicted. So that shouldn't light up my brain. So, Rabbi, before you said E in ethics is empathy, could you remind us of what the others are?
Yeah. The T is trustworthiness. And that, of course, means that I have to be trustworthy, but I also have to be willing to trust. Because if I don't trust you, why should you trust me? The H is humility. And my favorite humility quote is from Pastor Rick Warren, who said that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. Because it just means I'm not the focus of my own world all the time. And the classic example in Jewish tradition is Moses, because Moses was described as both the greatest prophet who ever lived and the most humble person who ever lived. Well, how do you have both those at the same time? And I always try to imagine Moses taking dictation from God. Right? God says, okay, Moses, take this down. Moses was the most humble person who ever lived. I am the most humble person who ever lived. And he still was after that, because Moses knew that he accomplished extraordinary things, but he also knew that his abilities and his resources and his opportunities were God-given. So he should have accomplished extraordinary things. And what he accomplished didn't make him intrinsically better than any other human being. That's really what humility is all about. The I is inquisitiveness. We want to learn. We want to discover. We want to grow. We're not closed off. We're not afraid of the unknown or admitting that we don't know or admitting that we're wrong, which goes into the C, which is courage. You have to be courageous.
Yes.
To do the right thing, to find out what the right thing is, to experiment and make mistakes, and then learn from your mistakes and take that knowledge forward. And the S is self-discipline, because this is an ongoing process. You never get there. You never finish the job of being an ethical person. Wherever you achieve, okay, that's the new square one. That's your starting point. Whatever I achieve today, that's my starting point for tomorrow. And if we go through life like that.
And yet, by definition, my starting point I might go below it. And that's still in the quest of ethics, because I'm going to make mistakes every day. I'm going to have thoughts that are unkind toward myself or others. I mean, those things are going to happen. So just because you improve doesn't mean it's a forced march toward this excellence. It's still a wavering back. It's a cha-cha, right? It's
peaks and valleys. It's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and then that's life. And that's okay. That's what it's supposed to be. Is if we don't have the lows, we don't appreciate the highs. Nobody is living on some plateau of happiness. It just doesn't happen, because it can't. It's the contrast between our moods, and it's really where we end up more often.
And that is so true. I was thinking about what someone asked. We were having this discussion about gossip and social media, and I'm saddened, just to be accurate, I'm saddened at how people are so mean on social media. Someone will say someone died and they'll say good, things like that. Oh, they missed our governor, they tried to attack our governor. Let's try again. Things like that. I think people not only are not thinking straight, but they're certainly not typing or speaking straight. And I was thinking, what is it we need to do to avoid gossip? And I came up with some stuff. And then I found an article written by Pope Francis that said the same thing, but he said it better. So let's look at his version of it. The 4 steps to avoid gossip. First, realize it is gossiping in the moment. And once you realize that, you can ask yourself, would I want someone to be discussing this about me? The problem with asking the question about me is that some people seem to have a missing filter or a missing soul, and they say, well, I have nothing to be gossiped about, or I deserve it and it's okay. If I'm willing to put up with it, then you can do it to others. So there's a loophole there. The second is don't ask leading questions. And it's kind of like your salt thing. Don't bring up the stuff that's going to cause trouble. If it is appropriate, defend the person or put it in a different perspective without putting anyone down. So address the issue, the intention maybe behind it. Maybe they're having a bad day or, whatever. And then a silent prayer, offer a silent prayer. But I know you have formulas for everything, Rabbi. So what is your formula? How does this world stop the gossip?
I don't know if I have a particular formula here.
Well, we
it's
will by
really,
next year. We're going to create one.
yeah, it's really, it's a matter of mindset.
It is.
What's really and we can expand this to almost any ethical decision making, is approach it the way you approach investment. You make a cost benefit analysis, right? What is the benefit of saying what I want to say? Is it going to help anybody? Is it going to make anybody feel better? Is it going to solve a problem? If I come to you and I say, I'm thinking of hiring an employee, and I know this employee worked for you at one point, and I ask you for a reference. Well, if this employee was stealing from you, you may have a moral responsibility to communicate that information. And because you are giving me information so that I can protect myself, it's not gossip. Note the difference. It's not that you're permitted to speak gossip. It's not gossip because you're communicating it solely for a beneficial purpose. So you have to ask myself, what's the benefit? Is there a benefit? If there's no benefit, don't say it. Sometimes the benefit may be outweighed by a cost. Let's say a person is a convicted felon who got out, got some training, got a job, is now an upstanding citizen. Is there any reason to remind someone about that person's past if clearly they've made amends and are on a new track? All you can do is derail them and offer a setback. So it's that sense of what is to be accomplished. And by making that evaluation before we communicate, and the default should always be don't say it. There are two words in Hebrew for speech. One is lashon, which means tongue, and one is safan, which means lips. So why do you have words meaning tongue and lips? Because some speech originates from the tongue, but sometimes you need to press your lips together to keep that from getting out. Not everything that we think should be said. And if we develop that kind of a sensitivity and that kind of a filter, then it's simply training. We're conditioning ourselves. Before I say something about somebody else, what's the benefit? What's the cost? Does it need to be said? Will it help anything? Will it cause more harm than good? Those are the questions to ask ourselves. There's the formula.
I think that's a good formula, Rabbi. I think that's a very good formula. So we now have also Jenny. Hey, Jenny, this is, we decided to go back to the meeting format. So if you want to voice something or do your camera, you're welcome to, but you can also stay hidden, whichever you prefer. If you have any questions, you can ask directly or comments or put them in the chat, please, whichever makes you feel most comfortable.
I was reminded we're talking about self-esteem. One of the rabbis who was very influential in my development, Rabbi Abraham Twerski, just passed away this past week.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, he was a really, really delightful person. And he did tremendous work in rehab. He was a psychiatrist, and he had his own rehab centers that he developed, and he focused very much on self-esteem. And he tells a story about a young man he was working with who had OD'd, and he said to this fellow, said, these drugs, they're poison. They should be thrown in the garbage. So I said to him, why do you think that you are a proper receptacle for this garbage? And he said the boy just started sobbing. And once he reached that point where he could actually discuss with him, why did he have this negative self-image? Why did he think that he was not worthy of treating his body in a more responsible way? Then he was able to start making progress with him. But if we don't think anything of ourselves, We're not going to feel any sense of responsibility towards others. And then, garbage in, garbage out. We're going to do damage to ourselves. We're going to do damage to other people.
One of the first patients I ever had when I was a young psychologist was a young girl. She was 9 or 10, and her mother was schizophrenic. And we got into a conversation about a variety of things. And one of them was self-esteem. And she said a series of things that made a big impact, a lasting impact on me. One is, she said, we don't have to like ourselves. We just have to know that God made us just the way he wanted us. And we have to be grateful for that and make him proud. And I thought, well, isn't that clever? Because she says, you don't have to feel like you like yourself. It's not your opinion that matters. You just have to be worthy because you are. You were made this way for a reason. So put it to good work. And I thought that was fascinating. And she was dying, this girl. She was very sick. And she said, I hate the way that grown-ups look at me. God doesn't care if I'm alive or dead. I'm going to see him again anyway. So what difference does it make? This life has not been so easy for me. I'm looking forward to heaven. She's also Catholic like me. And so I think that the idea of self-worth is that's another, we talked about self-esteem. Well, we will make that a program. I think that's a great topic. It's a complicated one. Oh, we have something from, let me see, who's this from? From Jenny. Sometimes we try very hard to project a better image of ourselves, but we just don't get very far. Is it better sometimes to just walk away from one place and start in a new, different place? Or start new in a different place?
Yeah, it's interesting. We in Jewish tradition, they say there are a couple of things that can change a person's fortune. One is a change of name, and one is a change of place. And we can think of that either literally or figuratively. We say, I'm in a bad place right now. So certainly if I'm in a bad environment, if I have bad associations, to the extent that I can, sometimes we're kind of trapped. If it's a job, if it's a school, if it's a home for a child, there are various reasons we can't always pick up and change our location. But if we can, that may help. I know when I was in high school, I was not a particularly happy person. And I was just itching for the opportunity to go away to college. I actually did change my name when I got to college. I wanted to be someone that nobody knew. I didn't even want to know me. And it created a psychological lever for me to reinvent myself. So yeah, it's to find ways where we can actually re-identify, reassociate, use artificial means to help us transform ourselves into the people that we want to be, or even better, the people who we really are, we just need to bring to the surface.
I think the whole idea of a do-over, and unfortunately, we can do all we can to make a do-over and just start fresh. But some environments are so ungracious that they'll never let us forget who they think we are, or who we once were, or the one thing we did. Those toxic environments sometimes can be changed over time with lots of loving, patient support. Sometimes, though, if there's an issue of safety, physical or emotional or sexual or financial, whatever, there's nothing wrong with doing a do-over in a new zip code. The problem is that you and I both know that we bring ourselves and all our history with us. There's no such thing as a total do-over, because that's how we learn. So that's an important thing to discover. But some places it's almost impossible to change just because of the way people treat you. I know these kids that have the bullying circumstances, sometimes they can change it. You've seen some kids get a famous person come in and become the champion for that person, and it changes things around. There are always things that can be done. The question is what needs doing, how to do it, and what will be the anticipated impact. And the smaller the school, especially a small religious school with old-fashioned traditions, the harder it is sometimes to change hearts and minds. Even if it's a religious school, it's amazing how hard it is to get a clean break. And some people become bullies. So you just have to decide, what can you do to change yourself and the environment first before you just leave, unless safety is it, then jettison right away.
Yeah, and I think we've all been bullied.
Yeah, and maybe even bullied.
And some of us have been bullies, yeah. And it really goes back to the same core that motivates gossiping. Bullies are people who are basically unhappy with themselves, who need to intimidate or harm others so that they can feel powerful, so they can feel important. And it's the same thing that motivates people to gossip, tearing people down through words rather than intimidating them physically. Or a lot of bullying is with words. So, when it really, we understand it among children. We don't like it. We try to find ways of teaching children not to. But I think it's part of the maturation process that children go through. When you see it in adults, it's a lot more unattractive. And it extends to so many areas. We've already talked about cancel culture, which is really a form of bullying. Thomas Jefferson, when the country was being conceived, the simple majority vote was not something they wanted, because they wanted to avoid what they called the tyranny of the majority. And even in the philosophy of morality, utilitarianism is a philosophy that says you do what is going to provide the most benefit to most people most of the time. Well, what if a majority of us vote that we would be better off if we enslaved a minority of us? That would be utilitarian, but I think most of us agree it wouldn't be moral. So developing that sensitivity, that sense of empathy that we talked about, to try and put ourselves in another person's place and see, what could that person be feeling? Not what I would feel, as you said, not what I would feel if I were there, but what might the other person be feeling? That's the step we need to take.
And we call that the platinum rule. The golden rule is not enough to just do unto others as they would do. Do as what you think they need or what the situation needs. Go above and beyond to the platinum of it all. It's interesting. Well, Rabbi, the drum roll, the word of the day is?
Well, if we don't want to get into that mindset that leads us to gossiping and bullying, then we have to avoid being petulant. Petulant means to be cranky, to be complaining, to focus on the negative. And it's certainly something that we see way too much of. So avoid petulance, and you're on your way to being a more ethical person.
That's right. I have faith that with these ethical discussions, my hope is that everyone will soften and forgive themselves and maybe hold themselves more accountable, but not in a crippling way, so they can make real observations and real changes, and do the same with others to help everyone be softer, kinder, more reasonable. And I'm going to repeat your ethics. So the good rabbi comes up with ethics: empathy, trustworthiness, humility, inquisitiveness, courage, and maybe the hardest one is not so popular, it's not in fashion right now, self-discipline. And as my father used to say, much of valor is what we don't say and don't do. And I think he was right. So
absolutely.
I think we have just a few minutes left. Who has a question for us? You can put it in a chat. Thank you, Jenny and Malcolm, for joining. Please spread the word. We have finally posted, we found a great videographer, Peter Kelly, and he helped us post our videos in a pretty format. They'll be on each of our YouTube channels. Mine's Dr. Red Shoe, And yours is, sir, Rabbi?
YonasonGoldson.com.
You don't use the rabbi in there?
No, I don't want to scare people away.
I think you should scare them. I like using the rabbi. I think it's nice. It sets you apart. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. I'm not going to bully you into it. So thank you for joining us. Next week, what is next week? We're going to talk about, let me see what we promised to talk about for next week.
We're looking at, service.
We're going to talk about service for next week.
Which can also be the S in ethics, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can have several S's in there. I think self-discipline, service and self-discipline certainly go hand in hand, though, don't they?
Yeah.
Maybe eventually we'll see which words you land on for this magical thing that you do with words. It's kind of fun.
And actually, maybe leave off with a teaching of the sages that they said one of the heads of the high court says that he grew up among the sages. So he didn't just inherit, he didn't just move into that position as an adult, but his father was the head of the high court before him. So he was always exposed to the sages. He says, I grew up among the sages, and I never found anything better for a person than silence. So I guess we could make the S in ethics silence as well. Right?
My father was a training analyst, a Freudian shrink. And when I was doing my training in psychotherapy and just starting out as a psychologist, when I had a practice, I was telling him about a particularly difficult case, and he was supervising me. And he said to me, that would have been a good time to ponder the fuzz on your knee, meaning silence. But maybe it would have been best just to shut up and listen, which he would never have said to me. But I think that's funny. So I often tell my grandchildren, how's that fuzz? And they look down and go, oh yeah, it's looking good. Meaning they were about to say something or do something that is not useful. They're going to be mean or grumpy or petulant, to use the word of the day.
Yeah, but we have this fear of silence. If I'm not talking, if somebody isn't talking, it's awkward. And so I have to say something. And as soon as I have to say something, well, I don't really have anything to say. So what do I look for? And that's when we can really get ourselves into trouble, whether it's gossiping or negativity or bullying. I look for something to say, and the thing that I come up with may not be something that should be said. So learning to be comfortable with those little silences is another tactic we can use.
Yeah, or preparing ahead of time some interesting stories that are positive things. Interesting, follow up on someone's garden and how they're doing, or how's their new snow. We're in Michigan here. Their new snow machine is doing, or how was their sledding with their grandchildren, or whatever. I think we can always prepare a few wonderful topics for changing the energy in a conversation. And as my father also used to say, there's nothing better to get the attention going of someone than devoted self-interest. People love to not only talk about themselves, but have people remember something about them. And it's a form of respect, and it's amusing, and it does change the energy in any conversation.
Yeah, it goes back to that inquisitiveness. Be interested in other people. And then you'll be able to let them talk about themselves.
Yeah.
Which is usually a safe subject.
It is. Well, Rabbi, as always, it's such a delight getting to work and play with you. I do believe in our mission with the ethics. The good Rabbi and I decided that we were going to try and get some interest going on ethical thoughts and ethical actions, and help people learn how to more comfortably engage in disagreements and ethical discussions without yelling, screaming, or profanity. Did I miss something, Rabbi?
I think you covered all the bases.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll see you next Tuesday at 12:30, and we'll try and do a better job of posting it on the social media, but it's every Tuesday. The link is always the same externally, drredshoe.com/ethics. But you and I both know I changed the actual URL. So this is a pretty link. So just go drredshoe.com/ethics, and whatever the link is, you'll find us. So we wish you well and have fun. Let's see how you handle the next gossiping challenge. How do you turn the conversation around? How do you make something good from any ethical opportunity?
Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. See you next week.